The day Salara Venthal met the man she was supposed to marry, she almost laughed. She had prepared herself for many things. She had spent weeks studying human customs, their strange handshakes, their obsession with eye contact, their clumsy way of smiling at everything. She had read about their ambassadors and their generals. She had expected someone tall and polished, someone who could at least pretend to belong in the golden halls of the Valeri Dominion. Instead, she got Ethan Cole. He walked off the shuttle in a dress uniform that did not fit him properly. The collar was too tight. The medals on his chest were real enough, but they were not the kind that came from politics. They were the kind that came from blood. He had a scar running from his left ear down to his jaw, and his eyes moved the way a soldier's eyes moved, always checking the corners of the room, always counting the exits. He was not a diplomat. He was not a senator's son. He was a mid-ranking captain from the Terran Navy, and from the way he carried himself, Salara could tell that he had not asked to be here. Neither had she. The marriage had been her uncle's idea. Archregent Morvan controlled most of the real power in the Valeri Dominion, and he had decided that an alliance with the humans was necessary. Not because he respected them. Morvan despised humans the way one might despise a loud neighbor who had somehow become rich. But the galactic concord was shifting. Old alliances were weakening. The humans were growing fast, spreading across the stars with an energy that made the older civilizations nervous. Morvan wanted to keep them close, to control them through treaty and marriage and obligation. And Salara was the price. She had accepted it without argument. She was the eldest daughter of the ruling house. She had been raised to sacrifice personal happiness for the good of the Dominion. She had been trained in politics since childhood. She understood the game, and she was willing to play it. But she had expected a better piece on the board. The wedding was enormous. 42 species sent representatives. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy. Salara wore the traditional Valeri bonding gown, a flowing thing made of light-woven silk that shifted color with her emotions. It stayed a cool, steady blue the entire time. Controlled. Perfect. Ethan stood beside her and said the words he had been taught to say. His pronunciation was terrible. His accent made the ancient Valeri vows sound like they were being chewed up and spit out. A few of the noble guests covered their mouths to hide their amusement. After the ceremony, the real indignity began. Ethan was given quarters in the far wing of the royal palace, as far from Salara's chambers as possible, without technically being outside the building. He was given no title, no role, and no staff beyond a single servant who had been assigned to him mainly to report on his activities. The Valeri court treated him like a decoration, something to look at, something to tolerate, and something to forget about as quickly as possible. The nobles were not subtle about it. They spoke about him in the hallways, knowing he could hear, knowing he could not understand most of what they said. They called him the pet, the furniture, the human joke. Ethan said nothing. He attended the meals he was invited to. He stood where he was told to stand. He nodded politely when nobles spoke down to him. And when he was alone, he did something that nobody noticed and nobody expected. He studied. Salara's handmaiden, a quiet girl named Ithra, was the first to notice. She mentioned it one evening while brushing Salara's hair, almost as an afterthought. The human had been in the palace archives again. He had been there every day since the wedding. He was reading military history, political records, star charts. He had requested language tutorials. He was learning Valeri script. Salara dismissed it. He is bored, she said. Bored animals pace. Bored humans read. He does not seem bored, my lady, Ithira said carefully. He seems focused. Salara did not think about it again. 3 weeks passed. The court continued to ignore Ethan, and Ethan continued to let them. He ate his meals alone. He walked the palace gardens at night. He spent hours in the archives, and then hours more in the military library, a section of the palace that a consort had no real reason to visit. The servant assigned to watch him reported nothing unusual, because the servant did not understand what he was reading or why it mattered. One evening, Solara passed him in a corridor. It was late, and the palace was quiet. He was carrying a stack of data tablets, and he looked tired. She stopped, because protocol required her to at least acknowledge him. "You read a great deal," she said. "You have a great deal worth reading," he replied. His Velari was still rough, but it was better than it had been at the wedding. Noticeably better. 3 weeks better, which should not have been possible. Velari was one of the most complex languages in the Concord. Most aliens never moved past basic phrases. She studied him for a moment, the way she might study a piece on a game board that had moved to an unexpected square. Then she nodded and walked away. That night, she told Ithera, "He is furniture with a pulse." But she did not quite believe it anymore. 4 days later, the first report came in from the border. A Velari patrol fleet near the Ashenmaw Nebula had gone silent. 3 ships, 60 crew members, simply gone. No distress signal, no wreckage. The border station sent a scout to investigate and found nothing. Not nothing as in no survivors. Nothing as in the ships, the crew, even the debris field that should have existed, had all vanished. Morvan was informed. He frowned, made a note, and declared it a piracy incident. The Ashenmaw Nebula was a rough area of space. Things happened there. He assigned a small investigation team and moved on to more important matters. Ethan read the report on a data terminal in the military library. He was not supposed to have access to military communications, but Velari security systems were designed to keep out Velari intruders. They had never been updated to account for a human who had spent 15 years in naval intelligence. He read the report twice. Then he read it a third time. He pulled up star charts of the Ashenmaw region and cross-referenced the patrol route with the attack pattern. His hands began to shake. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the tiredness was gone. In its place was something cold and hard and very, very afraid. He whispered to the empty room, "No, not them, not here." Somewhere in the dark spaces between the stars, something was coming, and the only person in the Velari Dominion who recognized it was a man they had all decided to ignore. The colony of Rethon had 600,000 people on it when it went silent. When the scout ship arrived 2 days later, it found a planet stripped to bare rock. The atmosphere was gone. The oceans were gone. Every building, every tree, every blade of grass, every living thing had been taken apart and consumed down to the molecular level. 600,000 Velahar had lived there. Now there was nothing left of them but a smooth gray sphere hanging in space like a dead eye. The images reached the throne world within hours. Solara watched them in the War Council chamber alongside her uncle, the military commanders, and the heads of the noble houses. The room was silent. Some of the older nobles looked away from the screens. A few of them were trembling. War Commander Draven, the supreme leader of the Velahar military forces, was the first to speak. He was old and proud, and had spent 40 years building the most powerful fleet in the Concord. He called the attack an act of unprecedented aggression by an unknown enemy, and promised a swift and decisive response. He sounded confident. He had no idea what he was facing. Ethan knew. He had known since the first patrol ships vanished. He had spent every night since then in his quarters, pulling together everything he could find, building a picture that he hoped was wrong. It was not wrong. 12 years ago, the Terran Federation had fought a war that almost nobody in the galaxy knew about. They called it the Harrow. The enemy was the Kvreth Swarm, a nightmare that was part organic and part machine, a vast intelligence that moved through space like a plague of locusts. It did not conquer worlds, it ate them. It broke down everything, living and dead, into raw material and used that material to build more of itself. It grew with every world it consumed, and it never stopped. Humanity had beaten the swarm, but the cost had been so terrible that the Terran government classified the entire campaign. Ships lost, worlds burned, weapons used that no civilized species would admit to building. Ethan had been there. He had commanded a destroyer escort during the final battle. He had watched 3 human colonies die to buy time for the killing blow. He still saw their faces when he closed his eyes. Now the swarm was here, in Valari space, and nobody believed him. He had tried the proper channels first. He submitted a formal request to address the War Council. It was denied. He submitted a written analysis to War Commander Draven's office. It was returned unread. He asked Morvan for 5 minutes. Morvan told him to go back to his quarters and stay there. So Ethan went to Saylara. He found her in her private study, reading casualty reports from the frontier. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the surprise on her face. He had never come to her chambers before. He had never asked her for anything. "I need to speak to the War Council," he said. "You are a consort," she replied. "Consorts do not speak to the War Council." "Then your council is going to get your people killed." She stared at him. His Valari had improved again. It was not elegant, but it was clear and direct, and there was something in his voice that was not a request. "You have been studying our military records," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I recognize the attack on your patrol ships. I have seen it before. I have fought it before." She was quiet for a moment. Saylara was many things, but she was not stupid. She had watched this man for weeks. She had dismissed him, ignored him, and called him furniture. But she had also noticed that he never stopped working, never stopped learning, and never once complained about how he was treated. She had begun to wonder whether the man who read military histories at 3 in the morning was the same man who stood meekly at court dinners and let nobles mock him to his face. She decided to find out. She used her authority as a member of the ruling house to arrange a session. It was not easy. Morvan resisted. Draven was insulted. But Saylara had learned politics from the best, and she framed it not as a favor to the human, but as a demonstration of the Dominion's openness, a gesture of alliance before the Galactic Concord. They gave him 5 minutes. Ethan walked into the War Council chamber, carrying nothing but a small data chip. He looked around at the faces, the Valari commanders in their gleaming armor, the nobles in their light-woven robes, all of them looking at him the way they might look at a dog that had wandered into the wrong room. He plugged the data chip into the central display. The room filled with tactical data, fleet movements, attack patterns, biological analyses, replication rates. It was Terran military intelligence of the highest classification. Information that Ethan had carried in a neural implant in his skull. Information that he was never supposed to share with anyone outside the Terran chain of command. He was committing treason. He did it without hesitation. "This is the Kavret swarm," he said. 12 years ago, they attacked the Terran Federation. We fought them for 11 months. We lost 22 ships, 4 colonies, and 90,000 people. We destroyed their central replication node and thought we killed them. We were wrong. He walked them through it. The swarm's biology, its machine components, its hive coordination, its feeding cycle. He showed them how it attacked, how it adapted, and how fast it grew. He showed them the one weakness it had, a dependency on a central processing node that coordinated all swarm activity within a given sector. Then he showed them what would happen if they did nothing. The projections were simple. At its current rate of expansion, the swarm would consume the entire Valari frontier within 4 months. Within 8 months, it would reach the throne world. The room was completely silent. War Commander Draven broke the silence. His face was dark with anger. "You expect us to believe," he said slowly, "that a species you claim to have defeated 12 years ago has somehow returned and is now our greatest threat, and that only you have the knowledge to stop it?" "I do not expect you to believe anything," Ethan replied. "I expect you to look at your dead colony and ask yourself what else could have done that." Morvan stood up. His voice was smooth and controlled. "This is a performance," he said. "A human performance designed to make the Dominion dependent on Terran military support. We will handle this threat with our own forces." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Commander Draven, your standard fleet doctrine calls for massed formations with overlapping shield coverage. The swarm will break that formation in under 6 minutes. They do not attack the strong points, they attack the gaps, and they learn from every engagement." Draven said nothing. His jaw tightened. Ethan's 5 minutes were up. He was escorted out. That night, 3 more systems fell. The swarm was not raiding anymore. It was advancing, steadily, system by system, eating everything in its path. He sat in his quarters surrounded by star charts and tactical projections, and he worked. He wrote a detailed tactical brief, a step-by-step guide for engaging the swarm with Valari weapons and Valari ships. He wrote it in perfect Valari military notation, because he had spent 3 weeks learning it for exactly this moment. Then he sent it anonymously to every frontier commander in the Valari fleet. One of them used it. Admiral Kethan, a young officer commanding a small frontier squadron, followed Ethan's recommendations exactly. She split her formation, used her ship's superior shields to absorb the initial assault, then hit the swarm's coordination nodes with targeted strikes. She won. It was the first victory anyone had achieved against the swarm since the fighting began. Her message to the throne world was short and direct. "Whoever wrote this tactical brief saved my fleet and my people. I want them commanding the war." In his quarters, Ethan read the message and closed his eyes. It was not relief on his face. It was the look of a man who knew that the hard part had not even started yet. The argument lasted 3 hours. Saylara had called an emergency session of the Noble Assembly, the full body of the Valari ruling class, 216 houses represented by their eldest members. The chamber was a vast dome of crystal and light, designed to make anyone standing at its center feel small. Saylara stood at its center and did not feel small at all. She had spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment. Not the speech. The speech was simple. What took time was the quiet work before it, the private meetings, the whispered conversations in garden walkways, the careful exchange of favors and promises. Politics was war by other means, and Saylara had been fighting this kind of war since she could walk. "I invoke the right of the consort," she said. The chamber erupted. The right of the consort was an ancient law, older than most of the noble houses in the room. It came from an age when Valari queens sent their husbands to command armies, granting them full military authority during times of existential danger. It had not been used in over 600 years. It had certainly never been intended for an alien. Morvan was on his feet immediately. "This is madness," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You propose to hand our military to a human, a man who has been among us for barely 2 months?" "I propose to hand our military to the only person who has demonstrated the ability to fight this enemy," Saylara replied. "War Commander Draven's counteroffensive cost us 40 ships and 12,000 dead. Captain Cole's tactical brief, written from his quarters with no resources and no staff, won our only victory. That brief was distributed without authorization. And it worked. Authorization did not save those 12,000 lives. His brief saved Admiral Kethan's fleet." The argument went back and forth. Draven stood and defended his record. Morvan spoke about tradition, about dignity, about what it meant to let an outsider command the Dominion's children. He was eloquent and persuasive, and he almost won. But Selara had done her work. The noble houses whose sons and daughters served on those frontier ships. The houses that had already lost family to the swarm. The houses that had read Ethan's tactical brief and understood what it meant. Those houses voted with her. It was not a large majority. It was enough. Ethan Cole was granted the rank of Warden Consort and given operational command of the combined Velahari defense fleet. 200 warships, 80,000 crew, and not a single one of them trusted him. He found out about his appointment from Selara herself. She came to his quarters, which was only the second time she had ever visited. He was surrounded by star charts and data screens, as always. He looked at her, and she told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time. "You understand," he said finally, "that I will have to do things that your people will hate me for." "I understand that my people will die if someone does not do something," she said. "That is not the same thing." "It is close enough." His first act as Warden Consort was to contact the Terran Federation. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within 72 hours, a team of 12 Terran military advisors arrived on Velandar, led by Lieutenant Rena Vasic, who had been listed on the official records as part of the human diplomatic staff. She was not a diplomat. She was Ethan's former executive officer, a tactical specialist who had served with him during the Harrow. She was sharp, efficient, and absolutely unafraid of Velari authority. They did not salute. She looked at him with the tired familiarity of someone who had been through hell with him before, and said, "Terran intelligence knew the swarm was coming. They sent you here on purpose." The words hit him like a physical blow. He stood very still for a moment. "They used me as bait," he said. "They used you as a contingency. There is a difference, technically. There really is not." He was furious. The Terran government had known. They had positioned him in the Velari court, not as a diplomatic sacrifice, but as a weapon to be activated when the time came. They had pre-positioned Vasic and the advisory team months in advance. Everything about his marriage, his humiliation, his lonely weeks in the archives had been part of someone else's plan. He allowed himself 30 seconds of rage. Then he buried it and got to work. The Velari fleet was impressive by any standard. Their ships were beautiful, powerful, and built with technology that humans could not match. Their energy weapons were devastating. Their shields were the strongest in the Concord. But their tactics were 400 years old, designed for fighting other Velahri in formal, structured engagements. They had never fought an enemy that did not follow rules. Ethan restructured everything. He broke the fleet into smaller, independent groups. Each group would operate with its own authority, making decisions in real time, without waiting for orders from a central command. The Velavri commanders hated this. Their entire military tradition was built on hierarchy and centralized control. The idea of junior officers making independent tactical decisions was almost offensive to them. Ethan did not care if they were offended. He cared if they survived. He merged human and Velavri tactics. The Velavri ships would use their superior shields and weapons as the hammer. The human advisory teams embedded on each ship would handle electronic warfare, communications disruption, and the kind of fast, creative improvisation that humans did better than anyone in the galaxy. Vasic coordinated the integration. She was blunt with the Velari officers, told them exactly what they were doing wrong, and showed them exactly how to fix it. Some of them respected her for it. Most of them resented her. All of them listened, because the reports from the frontier were getting worse every day. When the fleet was assembled at Korvan Station, Ethan addressed them for the first time. 80,000 Velari crew members watched on screens throughout the fleet. The bridge of every ship was silent. He did not give a rousing speech. He did not talk about glory or honor or the greatness of the Valari Dominion. He talked about numbers. The swarm replicates at a rate of 12% per cycle. Each cycle is approximately 6 standard days. At current projections, the swarm will double its fleet size within 2 months. In 4 months, it will be too large for any force in the Concorde to stop. We have a window. It is not a large window, and it is closing. He paused and looked directly into the camera. I am not here because I wanted to be. I am here because someone has to be. And I would rather fight beside you than mourn you. It was not a speech that would be remembered for its beauty, but it was honest, and the Valari, for all their traditions and pride, could recognize honesty when they heard it. Saylara watched the address from her private chamber in the palace. She had seen Valari war commanders give speeches before, grand and elaborate and full of poetry. This was a man standing in front of people who did not trust him, and telling them the truth, because the truth was all he had. She realized, watching him, that she had been wrong about him from the beginning. He was not furniture. He was not a political piece on a board. He was something the Valari had not produced in a very long time. He was a leader who had been broken by war and put himself back together, and he was willing to break again if that was what it took. 2 days later, Ethan presented his battle plan to the command staff. He called it Operation Ashenmaw. The plan was simple in concept and terrible in practice. He was not going to defend the frontier. He was going to pull back, let the swarm advance, and lure it into the Ashenmaw Nebula itself. The nebula was filled with volatile gas clouds, the remnants of ancient stars. With the right detonation at the right point, those clouds could be ignited in a chain reaction that would create a firestorm spanning light years. The swarm's central replication node, the brain that coordinated all of its forces, was deep inside swarm-held territory. Ethan's plan would force the node into the nebula by making the nebula look like the path of least resistance. Then he would burn it all. The cost was 3 colony worlds that would have to be sacrificed to sell the trap. 3 worlds that were already lost, already behind enemy lines, but worlds with names and histories and people who had once lived there. The room was silent when he finished. The Valari commanders stared at him. You are asking us to use our own worlds as bait, Draven said. Ethan's voice was steady, but under the table his hands were shaking. I told you I had fought them before. I never said I fought them cleanly. Nobody spoke for a very long time. The Ashenmaw Nebula was beautiful in the way that a fire was beautiful. Vast clouds of gas stretched across light years, glowing in shades of red and gold and deep violet, lit from within by the death light of ancient stars. It was one of the most dangerous regions of space in the galaxy. The gas was volatile. The gravitational currents were unpredictable. Navigation was a nightmare. It was the perfect place for a trap. Ethan stood on the bridge of the Luminance Eternal, the flagship of the Valari fleet. It was a ship so sacred that no non-Valari had ever set foot on its command deck. The crew watched him with expressions that ranged from suspicion to open hostility. He ignored all of it. He had been ignored for months. He knew how it felt, and he knew it did not matter. Saylara stood beside him. She had insisted on being aboard the flagship, not as a passenger, but as his political shield. She was his link to the noble houses, the person who could keep the fleet unified when the pressure started to crack the chain of command. She understood her role, and she filled it without complaint. The first phase of Operation Ashenmaw went exactly as planned. Ethan had pulled the Velahari fleet back from the frontier, leaving the 3 sacrificial colony worlds exposed. The swarm took the bait. It poured into the gap, consuming the abandoned worlds and following the trail of retreat deeper and deeper into the nebula. Ethan had seeded the nebula with sensor buoys, thousands of tiny devices that tracked every swarm ship, every movement, every change in formation. He watched the data flow across his tactical display and counted. The swarm was committing everything. Its replication node, the massive structure at the center of the hive mind, was moving forward with the main fleet. The node needed to be close to its forces to coordinate them effectively. Phase 1 complete, Vasek reported from her position aboard a Terran stealth corvette hidden deep in the nebula. The node is inside the kill zone. Ethan allowed himself one breath of relief. Then Phase 2 began to fall apart. The swarm adapted. It always adapted. That was the horror of it. A secondary fleet, one that had not appeared in any intelligence estimate, emerged from a dead system on the nebula's edge and slammed into the Volari rear guard. 30 ships under War Commander Draven's command found themselves trapped between the secondary fleet and the nebula's gravitational currents. The retreat corridor was gone. The entire Volari fleet was now inside the nebula with the swarm. Panic moved through the fleet like a wave. Ethan could hear it in the communications chatter. The rising voices, the questions that had no good answers. They were trapped. The plan had failed. They were going to die in this nebula. Draven made his decision. Without orders, without authorization, he turned his 30 ships toward the nebula's edge and attempted to punch through the secondary fleet. It was not cowardice, not exactly. It was the instinct of a Volari commander who had been trained to preserve his forces, to fight another day, to never accept a losing position. But Ethan could not let him go. If Draven pulled out, the formation would collapse. Other commanders would follow. The trap would fail, and the swarm would survive. He made the hardest call of his life. "Captain Venselar," he said into the fleet channel. His voice was calm and clear. "Block Commander Draven's escape vector. Do not allow him to leave the formation." The bridge went silent. Captain Venselar was Selara's cousin. Ethan was asking a member of the royal family to physically block the supreme military commander of the Volari Dominion. There was a pause that lasted an eternity. Then Venselar's voice came back, steady and sure. "Understood, Warden Consort. Moving to intercept." Draven was furious. His transmissions burned with rage. But Venselar's ship was between him and the exit, and the young captain did not move. Ethan did not have time for anger or politics. He had seconds to rethink the entire battle, and he used every one of them. He split the fleet. Every Volari commander in the nebula heard the order and thought he had lost his mind. Volari doctrine demanded massed formations, concentrated firepower, strength through unity. Ethan was doing the opposite. He broke the fleet into dozens of small wolfpack groups, each one operating independently, each one with a specific assignment, and the authority to execute it however its captain saw fit. The wolfpacks dove into the nebula like a school of fish scattering before a predator. They used the gas clouds for concealment, hiding inside the volatile clouds and striking from ambush. They used the gravitational eddies to slingshot around swarm formations, hitting from unexpected angles and disappearing before the swarm could respond. The Volari's superior shields kept them alive through maneuvers that would have torn human ships apart. The swarm was confused. Its coordination system was designed to track and respond to large, predictable formations. Dozens of small, fast, independently acting groups were something it had never encountered. Its responses were slow, clumsy, always a step behind. Ethan watched the battle unfold on his tactical display and made adjustments in real time. A group here, a feint there, pressure on this flank, a retreat to draw the swarm into that gas pocket. He was conducting a symphony of violence, and every note mattered. But the clock was ticking. The swarm was adapting, as it always did. In minutes, it would learn the pattern. In an hour, it would counter it. They had to ignite the nebula before that happened. "Vasek," he said, Status on the ignition charges. Her voice came back tight and focused. Charges are in position. We are inside the core. My ship took damage getting here. Engines are down to 40%. I can transmit the detonation codes, but I cannot get out. The bridge fell silent again. Everyone understood what she was saying. Ethan closed his eyes. Rena Vasic had served with him for 12 years. She had pulled him out of an escape pod during the Harrow. She had been the first person to volunteer for this mission, knowing what it might cost. Rena, he said, dropping rank and protocol. Don't, she said. Just don't. You know what needs to happen. There are 11 Valari ships in the core zone that cannot pull back either. If you wait, we all die for nothing. If you act now, we die for something. The detonation codes appeared on his screen. His hand moved to the console. It stopped. His fingers were trembling. He looked at Saylara. She was watching him. Her face was unreadable, that perfect Valari composure, but her eyes were not cold. She saw what this was costing him. She saw the weight of it, the terrible mathematics of command, where you spent lives like currency and prayed the purchase was worth the price. She put her hand on his shoulder. It was the first time she had ever touched him willingly. She did not need to. Ethan pressed the console. The Ashenmaw Nebula caught fire. It started at the core, where the ignition charges converted the volatile gas into a self-sustaining firestorm. The chain reaction raced outward at incredible speed, a wave of destruction that lit up the nebula like a second sun. The swarm's replication node was at the center. It had no time to react, no time to flee, no time to adapt. It was consumed in seconds, broken apart into atoms, and scattered across the burning void. The effect on the swarm was immediate and devastating. Without the node, the individual drones lost coordination. Their movements became random, stupid, animalistic. The hive mind was gone, and without it, the swarm was nothing but a collection of mindless machines running on fading programs. The Valari wolf packs turned on the disoriented remnants and hunted them down over the next 6 hours. It was methodical and grim work, and nobody celebrated while they did it. When it was over, Ethan asked for the casualty report. 34 ships destroyed, 9,000 crew killed, 3 colony worlds burned beyond recovery. Lieutenant Rena Vasic and the crew of her stealth corvette confirmed killed in action. It was the worst single-day loss in the history of the Valari Dominion. It was also the reason the Valari Dominion still existed. The surviving fleet began its long journey home. The nebula still glowed behind them, a wound in space that would burn for years. Saylara found Ethan on an observation deck at the back of the flagship. He was alone, standing in the dark, staring at the fading light of the nebula. He was holding a small metal tag on a chain. Vasic's service identification. He looked like a man who had run out of tears a long time ago. The Valari will write songs about this, he said quietly, without turning around. Humans will not. We just write names on walls and try to sleep. Saylara did not say anything. She walked to where he stood and sat down beside him on the cold metal floor. She did not touch him. She did not offer words of comfort or honor or any of the things her people would have said. She just sat with him in the dark and let the silence be enough. They stayed like that until the stars outside blurred into the light of faster-than-light travel, and the Ashenmaw Nebula disappeared behind them like a bad dream that would never quite fade. 6 months after the Battle of Ashenmaw, the galaxy had changed, and so had everything inside it. The swarm was dead. The remnants, scattered and mindless without their coordination node, had been hunted down system by system over the following weeks. Other civilizations in the Galactic Concord had joined the effort, sending fleets to help clear the remaining drones from Velari space. 3 new species had petitioned for alliance with the Valari-Terran coalition. The power balance of the galaxy had shifted permanently, and everyone knew it. Ethan Cole was the most famous human alive. His face appeared on news broadcasts across 42 civilizations. The Concord General Assembly gave them a formal commendation. Military academies across the galaxy were already studying Operation HFY. He was invited to speak at conferences, summits, and diplomatic functions on a dozen worlds. He declined all of them. He walked the palace gardens at night, as he had always done. He visited the military archives, as he had always done. He ate most of his meals alone. If anyone expected the hero of HFY to be louder, bolder, more visible, they were disappointed. Ethan Cole after the war looked very much like Ethan Cole before it. Quiet, watchful, tired in a way that sleep could not fix. The Velahari people were divided about him. Half the Dominion treated him as a savior. Families whose children had served under him and come home alive sent gifts to the palace. Frontier officers who had fought in his wolf packs spoke of him with a respect that bordered on devotion. Songs were written about the burning of the nebula, about the human who had stood on the bridge of the luminance eternal and given the order that saved them all. The other half of the Dominion hated what he represented. Morvan led this faction. He had waited 6 months, letting the emotion fade, letting the gratitude cool, letting the hard reality settle in. And the hard reality was this: the Velari Dominion, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, had been unable to save itself. It had needed a human. A single human married into the royal house as a political gesture had done what the entire Velari military establishment could not. For a people built on pride, that was a wound that would not heal easily. Morvan moved on a cold morning in the 7th month. He convened an emergency session of the Noble Assembly, using his authority as Archregent to bypass Selara's usual procedural protections. The charge was simple and devastating. Ethan Cole was a Terran intelligence asset, planted in the Velari court as part of a deliberate operation to make the Dominion dependent on human military support. The evidence was presented carefully. The pre-positioned advisory team, Vasik's true identity as a military operative rather than a diplomat. The Terran Federation's prior knowledge of the swarm's approach. The classified data Ethan had carried in his neural implant, data that no ordinary captain should have possessed. The worst part was that most of it was true. Ethan had been placed by Terran intelligence. He had not known the full scope of the operation, but the operation had existed. He had been a weapon hidden inside a marriage, and the people who sent him had calculated correctly that when the crisis came, he would do exactly what he did. Selara sat in the assembly chamber and watched as her uncle dismantled everything she had built. She saw the faces of the nobles turning, the doubt replacing the gratitude, the old pride rising up to swallow the memory of what Ethan had done for them. The assembly voted to strip Selara of her authority and annul the marriage. The motion needed a 2/3 majority. When the first count came in, it was close. Too close. That evening, the Terran Federation sent Ethan a private communication. They offered him extraction. A shuttle would be waiting. He could return to Terran space with a promotion, a medal, a comfortable desk job, and the quiet thanks of a government that had used him and was now ready to take him back. He read the message, deleted it, and went to bed. The next morning, he walked into the Noble Assembly alone. He had no guards, no advocates, no political allies. Selara did not know he was coming. Nobody did. He simply appeared at the entrance of the Great Crystal Dome and requested the right to address the assembly under the Velari law of personal testimony. Morvan could not refuse. The law was clear. Any person accused before the assembly had the right to speak in their own defense. It was one of the oldest laws in the Dominion, and even the Archregent could not override it. Ethan walked to the center of the chamber. 216 noble houses looked down at him from their raised seats. The dome was silent. Every eye was on the human. He did not defend himself. He did not argue politics, or challenge the evidence, or make excuses for the Terran government. He did not talk about strategy or tactics or the necessity of what he had done. Instead, he pulled up a list on the central display. It was the full, unedited casualty list from the Battle of Ashenmaw. Every ship lost, every crew member killed, 9,000 names. And he began to read them. He read the Valari names in Valari, pronouncing each one with the care and precision of someone who had practiced. He gave each name its full form, including the house affiliation and the ship assignment, the way Valari tradition demanded when honoring the dead. The assembly could not interrupt him. Under Valari sacred law, a formal recitation of the honored dead could not be stopped or shortened. It was one of the most solemn acts in Valari culture, reserved for family members and those who had shared the bond of service with the fallen. Ethan read every name. It took over 3 hours. The chamber was completely silent except for his voice. Some of the nobles were weeping. Others sat rigid in their seats, unable to look away. They heard the names of their sons and daughters, their cousins and friends, spoken by a human voice that carried each one with the weight it deserved. He had learned this tradition in his first week on Velendar, when everyone thought he was just a bored husband reading books in the archive. He had practiced the pronunciations. He had prepared for this moment without knowing when it would come. When the last name had been spoken, Ethan stood in the silence and said, "I am not a hero. I am a soldier who is given your sons and daughters to command, and I brought home as many as I could. If that makes me your enemy, then your enemy will still grieve for your dead." He stopped speaking and stood there, waiting. Morvan tried to call the vote. He rose from his seat, his face composed, his voice steady, and asked the assembly to proceed. But the noble houses whose children Ethan had named, whose children he had commanded and protected, and in the end, mourned, those houses would not vote against him. One by one, they declined. Morvan stood alone in his seat, and for the first time in his long political career, the Archregent had nothing to say. The session was adjourned. That afternoon, Selara found Ethan in the palace gardens. He was sitting on a stone bench near a fountain, looking at nothing in particular. He looked exhausted. 3 hours of reading the names of the dead would do that to a person. She sat beside him. "You could have argued the politics," she said. "You could have exposed Terran intelligence. You could have defended yourself." "They did not need a defense," he said. "They needed to remember why it mattered." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The assembly session is being reconvened this evening. I intend to reaffirm the marriage." He looked at her. "Is that politics?" "No," she said. "It is not." Selara stood at the center of the dome, in the same place Ethan had stood that morning. She did not speak about alliances or treaties or political necessity. She spoke the ancient Valahri bonding vow, the real one, not the diplomatic version that had been used at their wedding, the polished and careful words designed for cameras and foreign dignitaries. She spoke the original vow, the one that had no translation, the one that meant something deeper than politics or duty or convenience. It was the vow that said, "I see what you are, and I choose it." And Ethan answered in Valahri, fluent, precise, and without hesitation. The assembly gasped. 2 months ago his pronunciation had been a joke. Now he spoke their language like he had been born to it, because he had spent every spare hour since his arrival learning it, perfecting it, preparing for a moment that he had hoped would come. This time, it was real. Later that night, they stood together on the balcony of the royal palace, looking out over the lights of the capital city. The sky was clear, and the stars were bright, and somewhere out there, in a nebula that was still burning, the ashes of the swarm were slowly fading into nothing. Selara asked him, "When did you decide to stay?" He thought about it for a long time. The first night, he said, when you called me furniture. I thought, if I'm going to be stuck in a room, I might as well learn where all the doors are. She almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, not the way humans smiled, but it was close. And now that you know where the doors are? He looked at her. I know which one I want to walk through. She did not say anything. She took his hand, and they stood together in the quiet dark. Two people from different worlds who had found something worth keeping in the space between them. The galaxy would remember the Battle of Ashenmaw as the day the swarm died. The Valari would remember it as the day a human earned a place among their honored dead. The Galactic Concord would remember it as the moment the balance of power shifted toward an alliance that would endure for generations. But in the quiet halls of the royal palace, far from the songs and the monuments and the history books, Lara Vental would remember it differently. She would remember the night a man she had married for politics sat in the dark and whispered the names of her people, and meant every single one.